Neil here, and welcome back to High Intensity Business, the podcast we provide you with the tools, the tactics, and the strategies to grow your high intensity strength training business. Get more members for your hit business when you download our free resources over at highintensitybusiness.com/free. This includes resource PDFs on how to get 10 tips to get more clients, how to attract and retain great trainers, a high converting strength training sales presentation, and much, much more. Download all of those over at highintensitybusiness.com/free. This is episode 408. And today's guest is the owner of Essential Exercise and the author of Canary, the unlikely story of essential exercise, Dennis Rogers. And I've been enjoying Canary immensely. Dennis, welcome to the podcast. Great to be with you. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thanks, Lawrence. Thanks for having me. And it's great to be here. I'm a big fan of yours. You know that. So
Thank you. I appreciate it. So I just want to start off by saying I really enjoyed your book. It was quite a surprise because I felt like the way you wrote it, it made it very easy to read. And I felt like you really thought about the reader, whether that's the HIIT studio owner or the high intensity training studio client. I think you really thought about that in the way you wrote this book. I think it's very engaging. It's brief. And as I was saying to you, as we were sort of talking before we hit record, I think all of our colleagues, and you've actually have evidence for this, will read this book and be like, yeah, exactly my experience. Yeah, high volume, yeah, ego, yeah, steroids, yeah, did all that. Oh, and then you come across HIIT, and obviously we're going to get into all this. So I think it's going to be very inspiring and very relatable. As I said, really short read, really easy to read. So very pleasant kind of evening read, I found it. So I suggest and obviously recommend it to every one of our listeners to pick up a copy. And I'll mention this again at the end, but you can go to the blog post for this over at 408, highintensitybusiness.com, and there'll be links to obviously learn more about essential exercise and buy the book. Or you can just go to Amazon and search Canary, the unlikely story of essential exercise, or Dennis Rogers, and I'm sure it will come right up. And I highly recommend you pick up a copy. So, Dennis, I know you probably don't want me to ask this because you feel like I'm going to be like a therapist, but why did you write the book?
well, actually, you'd have your hands full if you were my therapist. Really, the idea came about, and the reason for it was that I thought it might be a good way to engage clients and help them to be a little more interested in the workings of high intensity training and why I say what I say about it. It really started with COVID, and we had that shutdown. And so my monthly newsletters became more frequent. And at some point I started to sort of tell the story of the business. And as I was getting good feedback from clients, it just sort of morphed into this almost, personal story, and how it coincided with my understanding or misunderstanding of exercise, and it just took off from there. I found it was something I enjoyed, but at the same time, really my intention was just to try to help find a different way to get the same information across to people. It's real easy for me or some of us in the business to kind of, research says this and research says that, and you get into this endless debate, and nobody can really dispute my personal story. They can't say, well, no, that's not what happened. No, it did. Now what that means or how that I apply that maybe is, open to interpretation. But so that was kind of the intent, was to try to help my clients and other clients understand what I was saying about exercise, and we had a lot of fun along the way, and had to keep it that way.
You got me thinking about the difference between saying how to and how I, right?
Yeah.
The latter
Yeah.
feels a lot less preachy, and it's
Yeah.
something I'm starting to learn in terms of when I create any content, making sure, and I'm terrible at this, rather than being like how to, because let's face it, I don't have most of the answers. It's how I, or if I'm interviewing a guest, it's how Corey Beth Lipowski did X rather than how to,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Something different in the way that comes across. So I agree completely with your
Yeah.
approach there. Your
Yeah.
monthly newsletter, tell me more about that. So, what
Well,
does that
this
look
is
like?
just
How does that?
something, I put it out to current and former clients, people that moved away, and And then there are people that along the way that had picked up on it that, I'm not even sure who they are, probably internet, probably hackers from Russia, I would think. Um, but, yeah, and so that again is just a way for me to keep people engaged. The problem I see a lot of times is somebody comes in, they get information, they get involved, but then they got to walk out the door. And then now they're going to be exposed to a world of different opinions and myths and this, and they're going to be bombarded. And this is a way to keep them maybe engaged and help them thinking that, they're not the Lone Ranger. And a lot of times people will, a lot of my business is referrals, and I have all the business I can stand. I don't even, I almost interview potential clients now and see if we're going to be a good fit. But, it's taken a long time to get there. And what happens in our business, I think, is somebody comes in, they get involved, they get excited. Now they go home and they try to tell their spouse or their neighbor or the people they work with, and they get bombarded with what? That's crazy. What are you talking about? No, I'm not going to. How does it work? And they get so beat up, they keep it a secret. They don't even, after a while, they stop referring people because they don't have the tools. So this was just another way to help them, not necessarily because I wanted to go out and refer people, but just for them to feel okay, them to feel like, oh yeah, even if they are going to keep their mouths shut about it, I want them to feel comfortable about what they're doing and for them to then pursue, the information. Because, let's face it, you can find information to support just about any position. You know what I mean? But then they come across sites like yours and stuff like that. And if they come across it on their own, it's a good idea. If I tell them to go there to your site and this is how you should do it, da, 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 they might reject even your information. You know what I mean? Just because I told them that, you know, I have a hard time with clients that they either actually tell me or indicate to me some other way that, I don't like to be told what to do. I think, well, you're here, I'm the boss. But the reality is I don't like to be told what to do either. So, you know what I mean? It's just as you were saying, not how to, but how I. And this book is about why I do what I do. That I can answer. When somebody comes in and says, well, why do they say da, 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 da? And they put me in this position to now I've got to defend what their doctor told them or their cousin or their trainer. And, I have to explain why they said that and why it's not true. And it's a no-win. That's a no-win position for us to be in. And we're placed in that position all the time,
Yeah.
because walk in the door, even long-term clients, I mean, I've had that happen. I had a woman one time that was making good progress and, she started to lose weight and, or I'm sorry, she started to gain body weight. And, at the same time, her strength was going down. And I thought that was kind of odd. Usually the other way around, and this went on for a while. And then, about 6 months later, she started limping and this and that. And then I come to find out anyways, uh, eventually she tells me that, well, I needed to lose some weight. So I started walking, and, I said, well, were you doing a lot of walking? She goes, yeah, yeah. And she goes, I'd walk, 12, 13 miles a day. And, the next thing you know, now she's not training because she got to have a knee replaced, And the thing is, she bought into some idea that, she could walk off the pounds, didn't want to tell me about it. And, she bought into this myth that, that she could do that. And I looked like, well, maybe I can give her the right information. I looked at it like maybe it was, I could have done a better job in giving her the correct information, and that's probably not a real good example, but something about what you
Oh,
just
yeah.
said, you know,
Yeah.
that question. So anyways,
So what do you send this monthly newsletter out on email or how does it work?
yeah, it's an email. Yeah, it's an email newsletter.
And do you have software where you send it to everyone or do you send it just individually? How does it work? How do you
It's
send it?
software. I use Constant Contact,
Ah, okay. Yeah.
and they've been very helpful. A little plug there for them.
Yeah, constant contact if I spoke over you then. Yeah, quite a few people use that for email service. That's fine.
Yeah.
No, that's great. It's just interesting. I mean, we do a weekly, and I was just interested in yours. What is it? I mean, I should probably sign up, but what does it look like? Like, what form does that? Is it how many words? What sort of content do you normally have in the newsletter?
Um, it's changed over time, but I'm not sure the word count, but a one page deal, usually with the
Okay.
topic into training. Um, you know, I probably tried to convey too much information in the beginning. It was, three or four, maybe a section about a machine, a section about some kind of research and this, and that. Where now it's a little more streamlined. It's a certain one aspect of training, one aspect of working out, and sort of the reasoning behind it. And I try to do it in a way that's palatable, you know, very easy for me to start out with a very simple idea about training. And the next thing the wordage, and I'm so far out in the stratosphere someplace that, you know, it's very hard to keep it simple sometimes with this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's even what the book was about. I was constantly chopping it down to keep it simple, to convey some very, really basic information over and over again. Cause that's what I find it
Yeah.
is with clients. It really is the same information over and over. As I've heard somebody say one time, you could convey all this in about 1,000 words,
Well, this is good for you to be aware of, isn't it? Because you're at a stage where you're thinking about hiring, and so
yeah,
you have stock
exactly.
answers for all these questions that you get. So
Yeah.
by having a document where this is how we answer all these, it's going to help you to
Yeah.
train that new hire, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
you're saying it's pretty much the same thing and just adapting it to the individual, aren't you?
Yeah, and it's doing the basics over and over, and just like you've mentioned about the high intensity uh, sort of processes that you guys use to hire people and things like that. That's huge, because really, I think that's with our industry, that's the big hurdle. That's the next big hurdle is that
Mm,
we've got passionate, intelligent people that run studios and operations, but how do we scale that? How do
yeah.
we scale that? And that's hard, because we run into a lot of conflicting opinions with good potential trainers and instructors possibly. And that's a challenge,
Yeah. Not
but
easy.
if we're going to move forward, I say if high intensity is going to keep, you know, moving forward a little bit, I think that's the big hurdle, is how do we, it's like a lot of this information in the industry is we got to make it palatable, that in a way that people can understand it and not, even though we believe it conflicts with most of the information out there in the fitness world, we've got to speak their language.
Yeah.
That's tricky.
Tell me, Dennis, we'll move on from this in a minute, but
Yeah.
I'd love to hear how you deal with the cardio question.
Well,
What's your
part of what
go-to?
it is in the book, same thing. You know what I mean? It- somebody says, "Well, what do you think? I'm going to start running, 5 miles, uh, uh, you know, a workout 3 times a week or something like that." I said, "Well, we'll keep an eye on your strength level. That's the best indicator because they a lot of times want to get some kind of prescription from me." Now, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, this is, it's a bad thing because it's going to probably do more harm than good.
Mhm.
And so I just keep it purely at, you're hiring me, you're coming to me to help you increase your strength. You maybe have a lot of other ideas about that, but in essence, that's what I can help you with is to get stronger. Will that affect the size of the muscles and the appearance and all that? Probably. How much? I don't know. Nobody knows. Anybody that tells you in advance they can predict how you're going to react to the proper exercise stimulus that's just blowing smoke because they really don't know. You know, we can control the stimulus. We can't control the response. So the cardio or the additional activity to some degree is going to interfere with that. How much we don't know, but it's not a synergy of strength training plus that is going to equal 3. It's that
How
one
do
plus one
you
equals 3.
if someone specifically says something about, well, how do I improve my aerobic fitness or cardio, quote unquote cardio with
I asked them, what do
strength
you mean
training?
by your aerobics? We
Okay.
I turned the table on them. What do you mean by that? Well, aerobics. I go, no, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by, and I try and, I mean, you and I are kidding,
Now, this is good role play. Keep going. Yeah.
but, I think we have to try to clarify a question, and it's very tempting to say that, they're being an idiot. I mean, that's kind of, if you debate it too much, So, they say, well, I'm concerned about my aerobic fitness. And they say, well, I understand. You read about that and it probably means different thing to you than it does to me. They said, but the reality is, aerobic, that really describes a metabolic pathway. It has to do with the way that your muscles process energy. And that only takes place when you engage them in muscular work. So any of this stuff will impact that. But the idea that to develop your heart or to improve your heart or to live longer, it's not quite that cut and dried. Um, you take somebody, you put them on an exercise bike and they pedal it with just one leg. And over the course of weeks, their heart rate will go down. You would think, my heart's getting stronger. My heart's improving. Because when I started 3 weeks ago, I would pedal this bike and my heart rate would go way up. Now it's way down here. You take that same person, then have them pedal the bike with their left leg. Well, the heart rate goes right back up if it was their heart that was getting stronger. So I try to use little examples like
That's a great
that,
example. Yeah.
but that's huge. And I've gotten a little better at treating that very gingerly, because it's a no-win. So I, again, try to keep it the personal experience. You know what I mean? I give them an example, just like in the book. I had a lady that was doing well, and all of a sudden her strength started going down. I said, what's going on? And I can see she wasn't losing any body weight. And I said, are you doing any extra activity? And I knew damn well that was the case. She
Yeah.
didn't tell me that, but I just guessed it, And she said, well, I started doing some kayaking and riding my bike about 6 months ago, maybe one day a week. Cause then about a month ago, I got hooked up with this group and they do long distance kayaking and they do long distance cycling, a couple of hours a night and, big ones on the weekends. And I said, well, that's the most likely cause of your strength decrease. So now you're going to be losing muscle because your strength training is still stimulating an increase, but now you're interfering with the recovery of that during doing this activity.
So it's interesting to hear you say that, Dennis, because I think a lot of our colleagues are taking almost the opposite approach where clients get more capacity, they get stronger, therefore they naturally want to do more stuff,
They
right?
do. That's
And they
right.
go outside and they start being more active.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like, and you've got way more experience than me, so you can challenge me right back. But I kind of feel like the intensity of the other stuff is so much lower than what they're doing with you that more often than not they can kind of get away with it, but with a huge caveat,
That's
which
the key
is
word. I think that's the key word. They're getting away with it. And
right.
that's tell them. I said, do as much as you can get away with. How do we know how much? As long as your strength is being
Sure.
maintained.
So she
Your
was
strength starts going-
overdoing it, perhaps.
If your strength's going backwards, how could we possibly say, well, at least I'm healthier? Really? So you go to a doctor and he says, well, since your last checkup, you've lost some muscle mass and you've grown weaker. We better run some tests. Something's wrong.
So
They
it's
wouldn't
kind of
say,
like
oh, that's great. Keep it up.
right. So it's kind of communicating to her like there's trade-offs here. You can have
Yeah.
fun doing all that additional stuff, the volume that you're doing, but just keep in mind that if strength is going down, that's a clear marker that health is probably reducing slightly.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And it's not, none of this is that accurate. These are general
Sure.
trends. But just the idea, tongue in cheek that, there's a good chance you're going to overdo it, especially now you feel much better, you're stronger. That's great, but don't necessarily get hung up on the idea that how many minutes a week, what's my pulse, what's my
Yeah.
this, that's where you run into trouble. Somebody says, well, I like to do it. I said, that's fine. And you're running for 30 minutes. Yep. I said, well, try 29 minutes. Try 29, see if you feel just as good. And if
Okay.
that works, try 28 minutes the next time. maybe you'll feel just as good running 12 minutes as you will 30,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
So it's more of a different kind of approach. It's just, you want to get away with it, you want to minimize it, you want to feel good about it. Why not look at what's minimally required?
Yeah.
And that's
It's
where,
very interesting. Sorry to interject, Dennis. I guess I want to get to the book as quick as we can as well.
Mhm.
And one more last point I just wanted to mention on this. I spoke to a colleague of ours recently, very successful in high intensity training, and was explaining during one of our sort of monthly group coaching calls in a membership that they had a few staff members who were bashing clients for doing quote unquote silly stuff outside the studio, as we've been talking about here on this podcast. And as many of us have gone through that experience of, you know, and still go through that probably more now than ever, of clients doing stuff that's not evidence based, that's flying in the face of what's really going to help them produce results safely. But what they noticed is that they were churning a lot of clients because they were getting this type of response from trainers, right? Trainers were calling them on it.
right.
And but as and that I think that's a huge mistake though, Dennis, because I think that, I mean, this is obviously what you've probably discovered as well. It's giving the client, and I've been going through a lot of this lately and having a lot of conversations with clients and colleagues about this. It's giving the client, showing a ton of empathy, firstly for their own perspective and experience, giving them a ton of agency. So not trying to control them, tell them what to do, make it their own idea,
Yeah.
but then at the same time educating them on the value of strength training. And in doing that, you're probably much more likely to retain that client and keep them strength training, keep them healthy. And you might not stop them from doing that other thing, but you might do over time. And I know of clients that we're working with who are like, over time, they've started doing less and less because they've become aware that, oh, hang on, I can get everything I need from the strength training. So they've almost come full circle in that sense. So I personally think like that's as much control as we can have. And I just want to share that because I feel like, I think it's, yeah, what's our mission here, Dennis? To get as many people doing this as possible. And I think a lot of our colleagues might be scaring off clients because their immediate default approach is, "Oh, you're an idiot," and here's why.
Right.
Right?
And just to, we've been talking, I mean, to be clear, I don't come right out and tell somebody you're an idiot or this or that. You know what I mean? All I try to do is encourage them to say, to look at it a little differently, like what's minimally required. They don't have a big problem when I say, this is our workout at the studio and this is what we're doing. And this is why we do it this way. It's why we only do X amount of exercises because it's a powerful medicine. You can only take so much, da da da. They pretty easily latch onto that, because they agree. They go, yeah, you're right. I don't want to do any more of this than I have to. And so I try to encourage them, try to take the same approach with riding your bike, with all this, any of this other stuff. I say, just look at it like what's minimally required and understand the logic behind that. That obviously if I go out and run 25 miles a day, it's going to have negative consequences. I might say, oh, I enjoy it, but just take a different approach. Like what's minimally required? You know, do I have to run 3 times a week for 30 minutes? Can I just go 20 minutes or 15 and get the same feel just as good? And I won't be as dragged out and my strength won't be affected as much because you're never going to win that battle of you're an idiot. If you do that, matter of fact, there's the
Yeah,
door. I mean, it's just because the world is full with, we're of the very minority position,
yeah,
that we might in the back of our mind think, well, you'd do much better if you didn't do that. Or there's, you have to taper it. You have to present it in a way that, as you say, the client thinks it's their idea. It's a good idea,
right,
they
right.
want to come in it with a badge of honor going, I used to go 20 minutes. Now I go 30. I'm that much better, where
Yeah,
eventually, hopefully I used to go 30, but now I only go 20 and I
yeah,
get just as much. I enjoy my running more. I don't get injured. I don't da 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 da. My strength isn't going down, so it's just a way to try to help them look at it a little differently. Same thing with any of the dietary measures and this and that, or, what's minimally required? What's the minimum expectation? What's
yeah,
the least amount I need?
yeah. Thank you for that. And I really appreciate that. I think it's very helpful to listeners who are always having these conversations with clients. So let's get to the book. Why did you call it Canary first?
Well, a big part of it was that, a lot of my time spent in the industry was in the health club business. And, I became my position became such that I was the guy that somebody might go to and, get advice along the same lines that we're talking about, that, what's minimally required. So like, if I approved something or some program or something like that, then it was well within the acceptable, presentation or acceptable, amounts that other people would say, well, if he approves it, then, you know, I'm okay because he's on this side of the extreme. So the canary in the health club was going
Got
to
it.
be the middle of the book. You know what I mean? So, and if I'm, you know, I'm going to be the first one to say that's too much type of thing. You know what I mean? So I don't even know if that makes sense. And it
It
just got
does?
down and,
Yeah.
um, and I became, sort of an outspoken critic of what was going on, to the point it was crazy in a way. I was selling more memberships than anybody. And I was telling clients, I was literally telling them, I want you to join, just do strength training, don't any of this other stuff. And they still would join anyways and ignore my advice. And I would walk through the health club and they might be doing a bike or something. And they would literally say things like, I'm only going to do this for 5 minutes. I said, they knew I was the guy I was the excessive exercise police. You know what I mean? I was in a gold mine, and it worked out fine. But then at some point it got to the point where it almost became an ethical thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'm really part of the problem.
Yeah.
Even though they can't exercise at all, let's say if I don't sign them up and they come in but there's almost nothing that's going on here that's not part of the problem. There might be some strength training equipment and it's difficult for them to use it because of the crowd or because of all of the craziness that's going on. So
Yeah.
it really became that. It became sort of a moral dilemma. And, that was my identity. That was my profession. And, it was a big switch, but I did much better when I was younger and I didn't have as much of a conscience.
Right. Yeah. And
Age,
if
forced it upon me.
uh, I think that's a good thing. And let's just take one step back and just give the listeners a quick overview of your journey, right? Because it's a fascinating journey and it's a quite a typical one in high intensity training, especially in your generation, and maybe even in certainly in younger generations too. Actually, come to think of it, which is a lot of us start out really trying to chase the bodybuilding bug, wanting to build as much muscle as possible, and try everything and try a lot of high volume routines until we kind of come across this kind of stuff. So can you just walk us through that? Just give us a
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
I was, for whatever reason, as a young kid, I was fascinated by muscle and football and running faster and all this kind of thing, and that really was my identity. I latched onto that at a very, very young age. We used to have all the typical stuff at home, the springs, push-ups and squats and, this kind of thing. And, we got a set of plastic coated barbells when I was about 11 years old. I say we, my brothers and I, and we would literally lift weights out in this little, like a garage behind the house in the midwinter in upstate New York, so we would have on boots and coats and gloves and hats and, the steam would be coming on, but it was magical for me. It was just magical. And then, maybe at the age of 13 or 14, there we had a substitute gym teacher one time. And it was like, whoa, this guy he was jacked. And this was like 1967 or 68 or something. So in those days, lifting weights was nothing like it is now. It was not accepted. It was either for football players or perverts or something. I mean, it was really, it was that, obscure, you know what I mean? But anyway, so I talked to this guy and he said, well, if you want to get big, you got to come down to the Y. Because that was the only place to work out. There was no such thing as health clubs you know, and the weight room at the Y was like a serious place. I mean, it took a lot of courage to just walk in there because somebody that wasn't serious would go in there or something like that. And these guys would bust them so bad that they'd never want to go back. I mean, they just, because either you're serious, you're going to lift weights. If not, you're in the wrong place. So they kind of took me under their wing and, I was fortunate really because it was more like a powerlifting thing, so squats and benches and things like that. And that was all about getting big. It was it. We used to go out to restaurants, these all you can eat smorgasbords. I would go with the older guys, be 3 or 4 of them. And the manager would literally be like, no, come on. You guys. They knew it was coming,
Yeah.
So anyway, that morphed into, I played college football, this and that. And then like a lot of people, I had at some point in the early 70s, my identity shifted from being a jock and a thing to being something else, just the opposite of that. And it was all about partying and da-da-da-da-da. And, the newfound freedom. And so I got away from working out for about 4 years probably, and then I made a comeback. And that comeback, I could back up a little bit, but part of my experience with the crew at the Y was all about powerlifters. Once in a while, a bodybuilder would come in there, and it'd be like, whoa, they're kind of different because it wasn't all about how much can you put on the bar and how much can you squat, so they weren't thrown out, but it was kind of a different world, it really wasn't quite the same thing. And just so happens the guy that was my mentor, originally sort of turned me on to this. He started to train for a bodybuilding competition. So I watched that up close and personal. I was like, whoa, he is shrinking every day. He's shrinking. It blew me away. He got leaner and all that, but he started running. He started doing this. He started training much differently. Instead of 4 days a week with heavy weights, 6 days a week. Now instead of taking 3, 4, 5 minutes in between an exercise, he would train. Boom, boom, boom. And he shrunk. I mean, he looked like a prisoner of war or something.
Both muscle and fat loss.
Both muscle and fat, But he was my mentor. I didn't question any of them. Eventually I did, but it was a real eye opener. And so when I went to make my comeback after a hiatus from about 4 or 5 years, the only information I had was my experience there. So I started training like he did as a bodybuilder. So I would get up in the morning, I'd do 1,000 repetitions of ab work for breakfast, with the rubber corset on. And, I was training 6 days a week and I lost like 30 pounds in 30 days, but people around me are like, what, you have mono or something? What's going on? I couldn't even keep my eyes open. And then eventually, I guess I must have been along the line started, muscle magazines got a little more bigger play because, a million years ago, they didn't have that,
Right. Magazines were huge back at that point, weren't they, for you?
Yeah, they started to get big in the 70s. Yeah.
Yeah, they obviously, I am a pre-internet kid, so I remember magazines well, but and it was internet really took off, I guess, social media, that kind of thing. For me, 2005, 2006, when I would have been at sort of college, university.
Yeah.
And so I did get to experience life before that, unlike, the younger generations. So I do have some experience with magazines and obviously marketing, promotions in magazines, but the way you guys describe it in the 80s is like it was just a massive industry. I'm not sure if I don't know if it was smaller when I was sort of, aware of it than it was then, but it seems to have a massive impact on our space. And in terms of inspiring a lot of our colleagues and yourself to move away from what people were doing and, start moving towards obviously other bodybuilding regimens, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Mike Lentz and all the rest of it. Yeah.
Yeah. When I first started, I can remember being, I don't know, say 13, 14, so 68, 69, muscle magazines. The only time I saw muscle magazines was in the bookstore, used bookstore, and they would have one table with piles of these like R-rated pornography magazines.
Right.
And the bodybuilding magazines would be on that table. They didn't have their own section.
So you'd never look. Yeah.
They would just be, and they would have the covers sliced off for some reason. I guess there's some copyright or something. But
Mm.
yeah, that was the original stuff. You know what I mean? It wasn't mainstream stuff, you know, and eventually it did become that way about 1980-ish, something like that, where it was huge. Movie Pumping Iron came out, you
Mm.
know, now everybody was a bodybuilder. And I mean, you know, doctors, lawyers would be coming in the gym doing, you know, 6 sets of 20 of this and da, 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 and, you know, um, and it quickly became unpopular because it didn't work. You know, the stuff that they were training like what they thought these guys in California were training like. And, you know, they were smart enough. So it was more like they were playing at it. You know, all they lacked is some kind of spray on t-shirt or something because they didn't look like bodybuilders, but they did the whole thing, the clothing, the diet, da 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 da. You know, so
Wow.
but the industry really did. That's about when it took off in the 80s. You know what I mean? And you know, I used to see once in a while I'd see an article by Arthur Jones in Iron Man magazine. And I wasn't real I didn't have that experience that a lot of people describe, like, man, the first time I read Arthur Jones, it just was an eye opener. I do remember a couple of the articles, and it wasn't so much of an eye opener because it was in line with what these guys were already teaching me. Maybe not one set to failure, but you know, train to get strong, train less. If it's not working, cut it back. That was the big message. The message was never, you know what, if you're not getting enough, do more sets, do more. No, work harder. Work harder. And if it ain't working, cut it back, you know, because you're only going to be growing when you're not in the gym. So I was lucky in that department. And so early writing by Arthur Jones just sort of reinforced that. It wasn't until I really got into what I thought was, you know, bodybuilding or my version of it, you know what I mean, where I uh, really, you know, went all in on it and then I started seeing articles by Mike Mentzer. So that got me thinking along the lines of cutting back even more, and it kind of reinforced that. And then from there, I saw just maybe a picture here and there about Nautilus stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. A lot of these guys are using Nautilus. So that must be, you know, and just so happened there was a Nautilus place in town. So I go there to check it out. And the owner of the place was probably the first real, like, live person I ever talked to about high intensity training. You know, nobody else really knew anything about it, you know? And, I went there to check it out. He hired me on the spot, you know? And, so I started working there part-time and, I kept my full-time job. But right about that time, um, anyway, a lot of this is in the book. I don't want to go into the whole story, but, you know, I
Sure.
experimented with steroids and everything. And as a matter of fact, in those days, we went to a doctor and said,
Yeah. That
you
was
know,
crazy to read
I
that.
want to get some you know, oral steroids for bodybuilding. The guy that I went to, I, I talk about this in the book a little bit, and it's the God's honest truth. I went to his office and he did a physical exam. I had a windbreaker jacket on. I never even took my jacket off. Like he did my blood pressure, my heart, like through my jacket. So it wasn't like a real in-depth thing. You know what I mean? And he just wrote out a script and there you go, you know? And immediately I took one pill and my strength shot up 30 pounds. Now it takes 3 weeks for that to really, for it to work. But the point is the placebo effect.
Mm.
As soon as I took one pill, I was 30 pounds, you know, or whatever. So there's a lot of suggested benefit there that, you know, but I was also very worried about the damage. And so anyways,
Yeah.
you know, this whole idea that I was going to be a bodybuilder, really the thing that put the biggest, poked a hole in that balloon for me was I was training at a place. I was good friends with the owner of the gym, and he had a friend that was coming up to visit who was a heavyweight bodybuilding champion in Florida, you know, and this guy outweighed me by 40 pounds. And I trained with him for about 3 weeks. I said, you know, no matter what I do, I'm never going to look like that, you know, and I worked really hard. I worked really hard and I was strong, you know, and lean and all that
But he
stuff.
worked harder than he did, probably, right?
Yeah, probably worked harder than him. But
Yeah.
it was just so clear that no, and he's not Mike Mentzer. He's not the guys in the magazines, you know, and I'm never even going to look like him. So it was right about that time I started working at Nautilus. in the back of my head thinking, "Oh, I'm not going to be a bodybuilder, but why is everybody here working so hard?" I mean, you know, they were working just as harder than the gym rat. It was everyday people training to failure, one set to failure. And so that became a shift for me, that I went from being a bodybuilder to, I'm going to get something else out of this, and I wasn't quite sure what. So my identity was really challenged there, you know. Just so happens the place that I worked, we used a really slow speed of motion, really slow. Like Nautilus recommended a 2-second positive, 4-second negative. I worked for a place that was owned by one of the owners was Ben Bokikio, Dr. Ben, that you've had on your show. We had our place and 2 other places that used this tremendously slow speed of motion, creepy slow. Way slower than Nautilus. And unbeknownst to me, it was right about that time that Ben was taking the information to Ken Hutchins, and they were going to use that in the osteoporosis study, but it predated super slow, you know. And so, and I got great results. I kept cutting back, but that experience and learning how to train people, really stuck with me. So from there, I spun off into the industry, and I worked as a trainer. I worked for Lee Labrada at one time. I worked at, some high-end personal training, but always that I used that sort of foundation of that training to train clients, and it was always considered very unique and like, what the hell? So for 20 years, I went through the industry and never ran into not one person that knew anything about slow training. Not one, ever. You know what I mean? And I was in Virginia at one point working and I was starting to think, I really got to have my own place. But had it, And I was interviewed in a magazine down there in Washington, D.C. And I talked about high intensity training, and a guy read that article and he contacted me and he says, we started talking about high intensity training, and I told him where I was at. He said, "Well, I have a super slow studio." I'm like, "What?" So we got together and I saw his studio and I was like, "Man, I was doing this stuff 30 years ago." So
Right.
this all evolved sort of unknown to me,
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
so along the way, things changed, but at the same time, underneath it all, it was evolving, super slow and high intensity training evolved. And so I was out of that loop. I was in the mainstream, and
Yeah.
it got to be kind of an odd fit.
How long have you been running essential exercise for now?
Mm, about 20 years.
Wow. Okay. Okay. And okay, so you said how you felt the need to eventually start your own thing because it was still quite unusual what you were doing and incongruent with the places you're working at and that kind of thing. I'd love to learn about the approach you take at. Do you ever call it EE, like essential exercise, or EE for
Hey,
short?
no, but I think I should.
It just felt right to say that.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious what your, I know my listeners really love learning about each other's businesses and learning from each other. So can you tell us a bit about your services, how you
The
package
protocol.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
protocol,
Yeah.
session length, equipment.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear
Yeah.
all that. Yeah.
Yeah. I have almost all Medex equipment. I have a couple of pieces of retrofitted Nautilus. Tim Ryan, who you've had on your show, has done a couple of pieces for me, so.
Oh, great.
And really the juice for me, we could back this up a little bit. The reason that originally I opened my own place was just so that I could own Medex equipment and use it myself. That was the juice.
Typical
I
story, right?
I put 5 pieces of Medex in my house,
Yeah.
and I had a handful of clients, and I thought, this is it. Life is good. I had the big 5 going on and clients, and then we got flooded. The house got flooded. And so I had to move into a commercial facility, and now I had to pay rent. So now I'm left with, okay, I probably should have some brochures. Probably should have a sign and some brochures. I thought, those are, so that's really where I started. My computer illiteracy was off the chart. I mean, I didn't know anything, and So all those attempts to try to, then once I started to try to put into words and make this information palatable and understandable for people, it was a disaster. It, I just lucked out in that people started referring other people. All my marketing attempts, all they did was educate me, and they were all mistakes.
Mm.
And that was it. You know what I mean? It didn't, I can't point to anything. Probably the biggest jolt I had, the biggest bump in increase in clients was I was contacted by a woman that ran a wellness place. You know, she was a chiropractor. They had Pilates, and they had all kind of essential oils and this and that. And I said, "You want me to speak there to your people?" I said, that ain't going to work. She
Mhm.
goes, "No, I want you to come." I said, "Well, I'm going to bash everything here." She goes, "That's all right. I want you to do it." I said, "Okay." And so I did it. And I tried to treat it with kid gloves, but
Yeah.
I probably got 5 to 10 clients.
And that was a local event, was it?
It was a local event.
Interesting. So that's a
And
good
a
tip.
handful of those clients I still have, and they referred more and this and that, and I used to do battle with them all the time about Pilates, about this, about that. Didn't matter. They still kept coming back. And
Okay.
so, you
And
know,
we just before we move on, regarding
yeah.
your referrals, very interesting. Obviously, you hear that a lot in our space that a lot of us grow through word of mouth. How proactive are you with that? Is it a case of, you're just delivering great workouts and people are just asking friends,
Well,
telling
like
friends and
I
family,
said,
or are you asking them for referrals as well?
I've done that before, and I use the newsletter, refer somebody, get 2 free visits, this and that.
Yeah.
And, I can honestly say in my case, I can honestly say that it didn't really have any impact. Matter of fact, people would
Yeah.
refer people, and I would say, "Well, now you're gonna get 3 free sessions." They're like, "Why?" And I said, "'Cause you're
Yeah.
referring."
Right.
Like, they didn't even know,
Yeah.
it just happened to work out that way.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think it's important, and had I to do it again, I learned a lot from my mistakes, you know, um, and when you boil it all down, it's still, the age old problem, what? I can go to Joe's gym for $20 a month. You're $45 a session. What? I mean, no brochure in the world is going to, that person's not going to pick up a brochure. Yeah, I'm going to go do that. They're just,
Mhm.
so it was more the brochure and the website was just to sort of reinforce really clients that were already clients. It just felt like it gave some credibility. It really, it wasn't, I didn't have a big expectation that, oh, this website's going to generate a lot of, it's happened, but not very often. I get referrals, for instance, from a doctor in Syracuse, New York, 90 miles away. That's a world known bone specialist. I've never even met her. She's referred probably 5 clients, and some of them
Amazing.
drive an hour and a half to get here. So it's driven by referrals, but have I been able to cultivate that in a predictable way? Myself personally, no, no. And really, I started as a salesman. I mean, that's kind of what I do. I'm probably good at that, but with this, I find it's just the opposite. It's a different approach. It's a different approach. You can't for 1 second be blowing smoke because now you put yourself in a category with all the other fitness baloney.
Mhm.
So we have to be very truthful. And that's what this book was about. It was like, you can't refute this. A person can't read this and go, no, that wasn't your experience. No, this was my experience. And that's why I'm saying what I say.
Mhm.
This is why. This is exactly the truthful reason why I'm telling you, don't run 20 miles a week. Because I've seen what happens, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
or, some version. Same thing with intervals. There's a whole, and I know you mentioned you're just starting that chapter, but when I was at Nautilus, we did the training 2 days a week. Then we added intervals with an airdyne or a rowing machine, and we got caught up in it. Like, wow, my resting pulse is 40. You know, but after but we were doing that 3 days a week. So now intervals plus
Mhm.
high intensity, pretty soon your ass is dragging on the floor. You know, and your
Yeah.
resting pulse goes up. Runners use that as a test for overtraining. They take their resting pulse and they get out of it before they get out of bed in the morning. Should be the same every day. If it goes up 7 beats from the previous day, you're overtraining.
Yeah.
That's their thing. So I didn't have
Noise.
it. I didn't have any interest in getting even close to a runner's definition of overtraining. You know,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
saying intervals are good, but they're powerful medicine. You got to use them so sparingly.
Yeah. Dennis, just want to make sure, I guess we're being respectful of your time, but I'd be remiss if I didn't just say, just in terms of referrals, Edge, add on to what you were saying. A lot of what you say is so fascinating, and it aligns very well with the patterns I see in our space. Give them a free session, but they don't really care,
I know.
for the
Yeah.
most part. And one of the things we found ourselves to be very, very effective for us is just being proactive and asking. We actually didn't have as much
Yeah.
success letting it
Yeah.
happen organically, but by asking, and
Yeah.
there's some
Yeah.
subtle ways you can go about this. There's the listen and ask method,
That's,
where you wait, which really was taught to me by Luke Carlson, again over at Discover Strength, where you kind of wait for that opportunity until someone mentions someone who could benefit, or maybe this very subtle, and then rather than go straight for the jugular for the referral, you kind of develop an understanding of what do they do currently, do they know you work out here, and then you offer them something like a free introductory workout. It'd be great to meet them, no obligation, move
yeah.
forward. And that's worked
Yeah.
well for them, and obviously worked well for us now. And so we're proactive about it, and that's been worked
Yes.
very well. And what we do on top of that is we'll set goals every week. So we'll have a weekly meeting with our little trainer team, and we'll set, depending on, obviously it depends on the number of clients you have, but we'll set a certain number of asks that week. And then,
Yeah.
you check that the next week, and that's really powerful accountability, and it happens. And we've seen an uptick straight away from that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wanted to add that because I think it's
Yeah.
something
That's
that
huge.
I know
It,
so many
it,
business owners, Dennis, that don't ask.
that's
And,
it. That's, if
and,
I had
and,
to do
and
it over again, yeah.
yeah, and if they,
You're built.
the reality is that most of their clients probably have someone in mind. They're just waiting to be asked. So if you're listening to this and you want a
Yeah.
really cheap, free
There's no question.
marketing
Yeah.
tactic, that's the one, right?
I guarantee that any trainer out there, if you just, you're building obligation, they're obligated. If you literally went today and asked every one of your clients, geez, I'm looking for some referrals, I guarantee
Definitely,
the
yeah.
average client would be willing to refer people. Sure. I mean, I don't personally, because like you said, my business is at a funny place where I don't want any more clients.
Just crushing it, Dennis.
Just the way
Yeah.
it goes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that law of reciprocation, right? As well, it's you're delivering a lot of value that they're bound to want to help you.
And you just ask them. That's it.
Yeah. So just before we wrap up here, Dennis, I want to be respectful of your time. Are we good for 10 minutes roughly, or do you need to shoot before then?
Yeah, I need to go probably in 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's fine. Give us a rapid fire overview of the service. So session length. You talked about equipment already.
Session length 20 minutes.
Protocols.
Once or twice a week. Session length 20 minutes. 7-ish exercises. Full body workouts. Slow speed of motion. And that, of course, you could probably do a whole episode on what do you mean by slow, but very slow.
What's your cadences typically when you say slow? What does that look
if
like?
I'm starting somebody and, we got to put a number on it, I would use 10 seconds just because it's a number and it's, there's a lot of reasons for it, but that's a 10-second count. So on some exercise, 10 seconds ain't 10 seconds, but, you got to start someplace. Let's see, protocol, anything else, and train it to failure right off the bat, right to day one. First, they get an orientation. Big thing covered is why the last 3 seconds is the safest part of the exercise. It's safe today, day one, Mr. Client. The final 3 seconds of every one of your exercises is going to be the safest part, and here's why. And I know you hear that a lot about handling that differently, but right off the bat, want them to feel confident that it isn't their effort, it's the danger, it's force.
Yeah. Because their force production is so low at that point.
Yeah.
That's what makes it safest. Yeah.
That's it.
Just on that, it's just gone completely from my mind. Oh, that's it. So interesting what you say there, training clients to failure straight out the gate. Do you have clients who are lower intensity where you will not train them to failure, maybe potentially because there's
it's their version. It's their version of failure.
I see.
And then they can be different. For some people, I think I got to call 911. For other people, their version of failure for some reason involves a giggle. when they're at failure in a chest.
Yeah, I have watched some of those. Yeah, yeah.
So, and everything in between,
I
what I
always
mean?
tell them
So
when they start laughing, I
it's
say,
their
"Look,"
version of failure.
I tell
Yeah.
them, maybe this isn't the right approach, but when someone starts laughing, I say, well, obviously got 4 reps left in you if you're laughing. Like, and
Yeah.
then that makes them laugh even more, and then they screw up their
I was going to say, good luck with that.
yeah. Dennis, I'm
Yeah.
so grateful for your time. This has been a lot of fun. I know
Yeah.
it
I
just
think
flies
so
by.
much. Yeah.
We'll
Yeah.
definitely do it again
I think,
sometime. And I'm just, again, I want to be respectful of your time and make sure we wrap things up in full. So for everyone that's listening, if they
yeah.
want to learn more about you, essentialexercise.net is the home for Dennis Rogers, and the book Canary, The Unlikely Story of Essential Exercise. You can pick that up on the website. And obviously it's on Amazon, it's at Target, Barnes and Noble, wherever you buy your books, but Amazon is probably the easiest place for people.
Yeah.
So again, that's essentialexercise.net. Dennis, any other final thoughts you want to share before I just wrap up the rest of this episode?
Yes. I really appreciate everything you do. I really do. You're really doing a lot for the industry, a lot for the people that are involved in it. It's great, really. And I know that sounds like I'm blowing smoke, but
Ah.
now you are going to send me that $20.
Of course, it's in the mail. Thank you so much. That's really meaningful. I really appreciate you saying that. And again, for everyone listening, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you get updated with new episodes. And we're on YouTube, youtube.com/high intensity business. And again, to get more members for your hit business, please download our free resources over at highintensitybusiness.com/free. Loads of PDFs on how to grow your business, including how to get more clients, attract and retain great trainers, etc., etc. So download that, highintensitybusiness.com/free. And lastly, to find the blog post for this episode, please go to highintensitybusiness.com, search for episode 409, and you can just also search Dennis Rogers. And until next time, thank you very much for listening.